The golden doors swing open before you, and suddenly you're standing in a world that exists beyond imagination. Chandeliers dripping with crystals catch the firelight and scatter it across walls draped in velvet the color of wine. Ladies drift past you like ghosts, their gowns whispering secrets against marble floors that gleam like still water. Everywhere you look, there's wealth beyond measure, paintings worth kingdoms, jewels that could feed cities, furniture carved by masters long dead. The air itself feels different here, heavier somehow, as if weighed down by centuries of power and privilege. This is it, the dream made real, the fairy tale come alive. You take a deep breath, ready to fill your lungs with the essence of royalty itself. And that's when you smell it. It hits you like a wall, sweet perfume wrestling with something darker, something your mind doesn't want to identify. Your eyes begin to water. The lady gliding toward you in yards of golden silk, the one whose fingers sparkle with rings that could ransom princes, hasn't truly bathed in 3 months. The gentleman bowing with such perfect grace, the one who commands armies and decides the fate of nations with a word, is hosting colonies of lice that could populate a village. The beautiful young woman averting her gaze so modestly is actually trying not to breathe too deeply because the breath of the woman beside her could drop a war horse. Welcome to the real world of royalty. Welcome to the truth behind the fairy tale. Welcome to a place where crowns were heavy, power was absolute, and soap was essentially optional. You're about to discover what it truly meant to be royalty in an age when divine right meant never apologizing for your body odor, when beauty routines were slow-acting poison, and when the most powerful women on earth lived in conditions that would horrify anyone today. This isn't the sanitized version you've seen in films. This is the raw, uncomfortable truth that history tried to perfume away. If you're curious about the hidden realities that lie beneath history's polished surface, I'd love it if you'd consider subscribing and hitting that like button. And please, leave a comment telling me where you're watching from. I find it remarkable that we can explore these forgotten stories together, connected across continents by our shared fascination with the past. It's 1580, and dawn is breaking over the palace. You're one of 20 servants who've just received the month's most dreaded assignment, preparing Her Majesty's bath. Yes, you read that correctly, monthly. The most powerful woman in the known world, the queen who commands fleets and colonies, who holds the fate of millions in her jeweled hands, bathes once a month. And physicians of the era actually warn that even this is dangerously excessive. You've been hauling water since before sunrise, bucket after bucket, heated over kitchen fires that have burned through the night. The wooden tub sits waiting, lined with the finest linen to protect royal skin from splinters. But you know what's coming, and your stomach is already churning. The queen arrives wrapped in her dressing gown, and as she derobes, you see the reality that court painters will never capture. Her face, that famous, powerful face, is covered in layers of white paint. Not just today's application, but yesterday's and last week's and last month's. She applies Venetian ceruse every single morning, a mixture of white lead, vinegar, and water. And here's the horrifying part. She doesn't wash off the old layers first. She just paints fresh poison over old poison, day after day, building up a mask that has actual geological layers. As she steps into the water, you watch it immediately cloud and darken. The lead-based makeup begins dissolving, peeling away in sheets like old paint flaking from a decrepit building. The smell that rises from that tub defies description. Metallic lead, mixed with vinegar, layered over months of accumulated sweat and dead skin. You must stand there, attending your queen with perfect composure, while your eyes water and your stomach threatens rebellion. This is what the portraits never show. This is the price of the porcelain complexion that painters capture so beautifully. The queen sits in that darkening water, and you know that next month you'll be doing this all over again. And the month after that, and the month after that, and the month after that. Move closer to the queen during her morning routine, before the court sees her, and you'll witness something that would make your blood run cold. She wakes with yesterday's face cracked across her skin like dried mud. Her ladies approach with bowls and brushes, and you expect them to wash away the damage. They don't. Instead, they mix fresh white lead with vinegar and water, and they paint it directly over yesterday's layer, and the layer beneath that, and the layer beneath that. Water is considered dangerous, you see. Washing opens the pores and lets in disease, or so the physicians claim. So instead, they simply add more poison to the collection already eating into her skin. The lead is doing more than covering her complexion. It's seeping through her skin day after day, year after year, entering her bloodstream and slowly poisoning her mind. She becomes volatile, prone to sudden rages that terrify her court. She forgets conversations halfway through. She makes decisions that contradict orders she gave hours ago. Her courtiers attribute it to the stress of rule, never realizing their queen is literally losing her mind to vanity. And she can't stop. The lead causes her hair to fall out, so she needs elaborate wigs. It grays her skin and creates sores, so she needs thicker applications to hide the damage. It rots her teeth and makes her breath unbearable, so she chews herbs constantly. Every solution to each problem creates a worse problem, trapping her in a cycle that will eventually kill her. This isn't just her story. This is happening in palaces across Europe. Queens and noble ladies are painting themselves to death, one layer at a time, all in pursuit of a ghostly white complexion that represents purity and divine favor. They're willing to sacrifice their minds, their health, and eventually their lives for beauty that exists only in the moment before the paint begins to crack. Now turn your attention to the most elaborate element of royal appearance: the hair. You're watching a queen's daily styling routine, and it takes 6 hours. 6 hours of construction that transforms her head into something that would make a modern person flee in horror. First, her natural hair, what's left of it after months of chemical damage, is coated with rendered animal fat. Not refined cosmetic oil, but thick grease rendered from bear or ox carcasses. The smell alone is overwhelming. Rancid fat mixed with unwashed hair that hasn't been properly cleaned in weeks. But the smell is just the beginning. This grease serves a purpose beyond styling. It attracts every insect within range. Within hours, fleas begin arriving, then lice. They don't just visit, they move in permanently. They lay eggs in the grease. They burrow into the accumulated layers of fat and dead skin. They establish complete breeding colonies. The queen's head becomes a living ecosystem. Insects are born, live their entire lives, and die in her hairstyle. And this structure stays in place for 2 to 3 weeks because construction is so time-consuming and expensive. During that time, the biological activity continues evolving. Dead insects accumulate and decompose, attracting scavenger insects. A complete food chain develops on her head. She must maintain perfect composure through all of this. She carries an elegant scratching stick, ivory or silver decorated with jewels, that she can discreetly insert into her hairstyle to provide temporary relief from the constant crawling and itching. But she can never show discomfort, never acknowledge the reality. She must sit through diplomatic meetings, religious ceremonies, and state banquets, while parasites literally feed on her scalp. The powder dusted over this biological nightmare quickly mixes with the grease, insect waste, and accumulated grime to create a paste that hardens into something like plaster. It can't be removed without literally cutting it away from her scalp. Many women develop permanent bald patches where the weight and constant insect activity have destroyed their hair completely. And here's the most disturbing part.
This is considered the height of fashion and sophistication. The more elaborate your hairstyle, the more insects it can support, the higher your social status. What should have been recognized as a public health crisis became a competition to see who could create the most impressive monument to living filth. Here's something that will fundamentally change how you think about power and dignity. In the royal courts of England, there existed a position called the Groom of the Close Stool. This man's job was to attend the king during his most private moments, carrying his portable toilet, cleaning him afterward, and maintaining his comfort during bodily functions. But this wasn't just some degrading servant position relegated to the powerless. This was one of the most politically powerful positions in the entire kingdom. These men participated in policy-making at the highest levels. They knew state secrets that generals would kill to learn. They had the king's ear quite literally, because monarchs would conduct business while using their close stool. Picture this. You're a foreign ambassador, and you've been granted an audience with the king. You enter his chambers to find him seated on his portable toilet, with his groom kneeling behind him. The king greets you warmly and begins discussing the trade treaty that could change your nation's future, while his attendant cleans royal waste from his unwashed body. Treaties were signed this way. Wars were declared. Executions were ordered. The most important decisions in English history were made while one man wiped another's backside in rooms reeking of royal excrement. The grooms developed genuine emotional bonds with the kings they served. They knew when the monarch was ill before anyone else. They understood his physical weaknesses intimately. They observed his bodily functions with clinical precision and used this knowledge to gain political advantage. They became human confessionals for royal bodies that were falling apart. And families competed for this honor. Fathers trained sons to take over the position. These dynasties accumulated wealth, property, and political influence across generations, all built on their willingness to handle what no one else wanted to touch. The psychological complexity is staggering. Despite his absolute power, the king was completely vulnerable during these moments. The groom held the king's physical comfort and dignity literally in his hands. This intimate knowledge became a form of political currency that could be traded, leveraged, and used to influence the fate of nations. Now we travel to the ultimate expression of royal excess, Versailles under Louis XIV, the Sun King. He decided to centralize his entire court in one location, moving more than 10,000 people, royals, aristocrats, government officials, servants, military officers, into his palace and its surrounding buildings. The problem? The infrastructure was never designed to handle this many people. Walk through Versailles at the height of its glory, and yes, you'll see golden walls gleaming in candlelight. You'll see priceless artwork and mirrors reflecting infinite images of luxury. But your feet will splash through puddles of urine soaking into imported carpets worth fortunes. You'll hear the constant sound of liquid trickling as courtiers relieve themselves wherever they happen to be standing. The smell of human waste mingles with expensive perfumes to create something that burns your nostrils and makes breathing an act of willpower. There's a documented incident where Marie Antoinette was walking through an interior courtyard when human waste, thrown from an upper window, fell onto her elaborate gown. This wasn't a freak accident. This was standard practice at Versailles, where throwing waste out windows was normal because there was nowhere else for it to go. The latrines frequently leaked into the bedrooms below them. Blockages in the palace's pipes occasionally poisoned everything in the queen's kitchen. The future kings and queens of France were raised in rooms where sewage dripped from ceilings and excrement was as common as silk. With 10,000 people producing waste daily and only primitive sewage systems that frequently failed, the air was thick with stench that no amount of perfume could mask. Ambassadors came from across the world expecting to witness French sophistication. Instead, they found themselves wading through human waste while conducting diplomatic negotiations with people who hadn't bathed in months. The courtiers developed elaborate coping mechanisms. They learned to identify the safest areas where waste accumulation was minimal. They developed warning codes for fresh deposits. They mastered techniques for walking through corridors without stepping in filth. The most sophisticated social system in European history adapted itself to function within conditions that would have horrified medieval peasants. Women's elaborate gowns became mobile waste distribution systems. The multiple layers were designed partly to hide the fact that ladies were urinating where they stood. As they moved through their daily routines, their skirts absorbed and distributed waste throughout the palace. Children born and raised in this environment came to see it as completely normal. Young nobles who spent their entire lives at Versailles literally didn't understand there were alternatives because they'd never experienced anything else. The palace that was supposed to represent the pinnacle of human civilization was actually a gilded cesspit where appearance and reality existed in complete opposition. And this model was exported across Europe as other monarchs tried to recreate Versailles' magnificence, not realizing they were actually recreating a public health disaster. In the German states, there lived a Countess of Hanover who suffered from what historical records delicately call a distressing malady, almost certainly syphilis or another venereal disease ravaging the European nobility. Her body was covered in weeping sores. Her skin felt like it was burning from the inside out. In desperation, she turned to milk baths, lying in tubs of warm milk that provided temporary relief from the constant agony.
Here's where the story takes a turn that reveals something truly dark about the royal mindset. After soaking in the milk, she donated it to the poor. Think about that for a moment. She was so diseased that her very presence could infect others, and she chose to take milk contaminated with her infected bodily fluids and pass it to starving families as an act of supposed Christian charity. Imagine being a poor family receiving this donation. You're desperate, your children are malnourished, winter is coming. Then arrives a servant from the noble household bearing what seems like a gift from heaven, fresh milk that could mean the difference between life and death. You accept it gratefully, perhaps saying prayers of thanksgiving for the Countess's generosity. You have no way of knowing this milk has been contaminated with the bodily fluids of a woman dying from venereal disease. You can't see the organisms now swimming in the liquid you're about to feed your children. You don't understand that this charity is actually a death sentence disguised as kindness. The Countess herself likely believed she was performing a Christian duty. In her diseased mind, clouded by advanced syphilis, she was sharing her abundance with those in need. The fact that her abundance was literally contaminated with infection seemed irrelevant to the moral calculus of the time. This reveals the profound disconnect between nobility and common humanity. The Countess lived in a world where her comfort took precedence over the lives of hundreds of poor families. The possibility that her bathing habits might kill innocent people simply didn't register as morally relevant. They were poor, therefore their lives had minimal value compared to her temporary relief. And this wasn't isolated. Similar acts of generosity spread death throughout Europe. Food prepared by diseased royal cooks, clothing passed down from infected nobles, sexual contact between diseased nobility and servants who couldn't refuse. The royal courts became biological warfare centers, spreading disease through every aspect of their interaction with common people. Families who had praised the Countess's generosity while their children died faced a horrible realization. Their benefactor had killed their loved ones through kindness. The very act they'd celebrated as evidence of noble virtue was actually murder disguised as charity. Our final story takes us to Spain during the Reconquista, where Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand created perhaps the most psychologically disturbing hygiene policy in history. They made cleanliness a crime punishable by death. The Christian doctrine in Spain declared bathing to be a corrupt practice leading only to nakedness and hedonism. It was considered unreligious, even heretical. But this wasn't just religious preference. It became official state policy backed by the Inquisition. After the conquest of Granada, Muslims living under Christian rule were forced to abandon not just their religion, but their daily bathing practices. Isabella and Ferdinand ordered all Muslim baths destroyed, and bathing was strictly forbidden. Inquisitors would inspect homes for signs of washing. Being caught with soap, clean clothes, or bathing facilities could result in being burned alive as a heretic. Imagine the psychological torture of this policy. Your daily ablutions, a cornerstone of your faith and personal hygiene, suddenly become a capital offense. The very act of washing your face becomes evidence that could doom your entire family. Children were encouraged to inform on parents who bathed. Servants were interrogated about their master's hygiene habits. The entire social structure became a surveillance network designed to detect and punish cleanliness. When Columbus reported the daily bathing habits of indigenous peoples in the Bahamas and Caribbean, Isabella was horrified and commanded her new subjects to stop this blasphemous practice immediately. Clean, healthy indigenous people were forced to abandon hygiene practices that had kept them healthy for centuries in favor of European filth that brought disease and death. Spanish conquistadors, unwashed from months, riddled with diseases unknown in the Americas, encountered indigenous peoples whose daily bathing had protected them for generations. Instead of learning from these superior practices, the Spanish declared them satanic and systematically destroyed the infrastructure supporting cleanliness in the New World. The Spanish even established purity of blood laws that extended to hygiene practices. Families had to prove not only Christian ancestry, but also Christian uncleanliness. Being descended from people who bathed regularly could disqualify you from positions or social ranks. Cleanliness became racial evidence used to justify persecution and execution. The framework supporting this horror was embedded in Christian theology of the time. Cleanliness was associated with vanity, which was sinful. Suffering through physical discomfort was seen as spiritual purification. The more you suffered in flesh, the more you were purified in spirit. Spanish royal courts became showcases for competitive suffering. Nobles competed to see who could go longest without bathing, who could endure the most extreme body odor, who could develop the most impressive array of diseases and parasitic infections. Religious policy became social competition based on deliberate self-harm. And this ideology was exported across the entire Spanish Empire. From the Philippines to Mexico, from Peru to the Caribbean, colonial administrators systematically destroyed local bathing practices and replaced them with European filth. Ancient aqueducts were abandoned. Public baths were demolished. Traditional cleansing rituals were banned under penalty of death. The medical consequences were catastrophic. Diseases that had been controlled through traditional hygiene exploded across Spanish territories. The Spanish inadvertently created biological warfare on a massive scale, using filth as a weapon against their own subjects. As we step back from these journeys through palace corridors and royal chambers, one truth crystallizes with uncomfortable clarity. The fairy tale was always a lie. These weren't just stories about dirty people in pretty clothes. These were human beings trapped in nightmares of their own creation, where tradition, vanity, and social pressure combined to create living conditions that would qualify as torture today. The queens we've encountered weren't monsters. They were victims of systems that valued appearance over health, ceremony over comfort, status over basic human dignity. They lived their entire lives in physical discomfort that would drive modern people to madness, yet they maintained composure, ruled nations, and shaped history while literally crawling with parasites and slowly poisoning themselves day after year until death finally released them from their gilded prisons. The crown was heavy, yes, but not for the reasons the fairy tales tell you.